Good morning and welcome to Talmudic study this morning as we learn about the Talmud's advice on the things that we should be praying for. Quite interesting to see what the Talmud has to tell us. Quite interesting to see what the Talmud has to tell us about the things that we should be praying for. You know, I find that people in general have a very difficult time with praying for things. They have a hard time. They turn to God and they say, you know, I shouldn't be asking God for things. I can pray for other people, but I don't feel comfortable asking God for my own needs. And today, we'll get some insights into the context of prayer. Now, the way I've taught it in the past is that prayer is really an opportunity for us to connect deeply in an intimate relationship with God. So the request component of prayer is actually a low level of prayer. It's lower energy within prayer, because prayer is really about the connection. It's like a relationship with someone that you love. Imagine you're in a relationship, and if the extent of the conversation between husband and wife is all about the things that you need from your spouse, it's a very low level of relationship. We have conversation not because of the business things that we need to resolve, but because of the relationship. We connect because we love each other and we talk. That's why we talk. We also, in the midst of the conversation, we make arrangements and logistics and we sort things out. But that's not the extent of the conversation. It's about the relationship. And the same thing goes with our relationship with God. Prayer is an opportunity to connect. It's a platform to bring us together in an intimate bond. Amidst that intimate bond, we also ask God for our things, for our needs. And in fact, it's actually an important part of the relationship with God, because if not that we had needs, we probably wouldn't even turn to God in the first place in prayer. So elsewhere it's stated in Torah that God actually made us in such a way that we have to turn to Him for our needs, because if not, we would never look for God. Think about it. You know, there's no atheists in foxholes. When people are in trouble, that's when they turn to God. That's when they turn to the synagogue. And in a certain sense, it's a little sad that we need to have a problem in order to be able to find our purpose, in order to find our Creator. Be it as it may, now that we have overcome or gathered the gumption, the courage to face God in prayer, now what are you supposed to ask for? And that's what today's Talmud is about. So if you have the Talmud with you, I'm on page 128. It's this black book of Talmud. It's published by Art Scroll, called the Ein Yaakov, volume 1 of Ein Yaakov, Tractate Brachot. We're on page 128. If you don't have the book, don't worry about it. Follow along with us. I'd like to welcome Keith Kleinick and Elaine that are with us on YouTube. I'd like to welcome Corey and Marty and Lucy and Terry that are with us on Facebook, and everybody else that's with us live and later. Thank you for joining us here this morning. We don't have any sponsor today, but if anybody would like to dedicate daily Torah study, you can do so at jewishgardens.com/donate. That's jewishgardens.com/donate. Or you can do so by calling the office at 561-624-2223. That's 624-2223 to use the power of Torah to bless you, your loved ones, maybe living, maybe deceased, on the occasion of a birthday, a yahrzeit, an anniversary, something special, or just because to be able to use the blessing of Torah, to channel the blessing of this Torah study to bless you and your loved ones in every endeavor. Again, online it's at jewishgardens.com/donate, or on the phone at 561-624-2223. You may recall last week, if you were with me, we learned about the first interpretation of 5 interpretations on what we should be praying for. And what we spoke about last week was a very interesting and controversial conversation in the Talmud about praying for a shidduch, praying for a mate, for marriage, for a partner in marriage. And that became a very interesting discussion. You can review that discussion if you missed it at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Under the Talmud playlist, you can find that class from last week. But today we continue with 4 more interpretations as to what it is that we should be praying for. To refresh your memory, I'm going back to page 127, when the Talmud continues with the topic of prayer, analyzing a verse that discusses praying for God's help regarding a specific time or event. Now this verse comes from Psalms 32, verse 6. It says like this: "For this let every devout man pray to you regarding a time of mitzvah." So King David in Psalm says, "For this let every devout man pray to you regarding a time of mitzvah. Alazois yispalel kol chassid leilecha leis mitzvah." He should pray that when the time of mitzvah comes, Hashem should grant him what he needs. The question is, what is the time of mitzvah? So that's what this Talmud is really about. We got 5 interpretations here to understand the meaning of the time of mitzvah. That's what we're working on in this Talmud. The first interpretation of mitzvah was finding as it relates to a relationship. And we brought up the fascinating conversation that would happen in the West, in Israel. Soon after marriage, the friends of the groom would ask him, "Are you finding, or did you find?" Finding in the present tense or finding in the past tense, which was a veiled reference to 2 verses in the Torah. In other words, is your marriage a disaster, or is your marriage a bed of roses? And we spoke about that it was at initial glance, it looked like that was blaming the bad marriage on the wife. But in reality, it was about an educational conversation with the groom, reminding him that the joy or lack thereof in your relationship depends on yourself. It depends on what kind of emphasis you place on yourself. Do you put your spouse on the pedestal and yourself lower, or are you on the pedestal and your spouse is lower? That will make all the difference about whether you're going to have a happy marriage or a disastrous marriage. That was the first of 5 opinions, as 5 interpretations as to what we should be praying for. Today we continue on page 128 with back to our discussion regarding a time of mitzvah. We're interpreting the words of King David in Psalms, and we're now presenting the second opinion on what it means. Said Rabbi Nosson, regarding a time of mitzvah, this refers to finding success in, not in marriage, but in Torah learning. As it says regarding Torah, quoting from Proverbs chapter 8, verse 35, "For he who finds me finds life. Ki motzi Matzah Chayim, he who finds me has found life." And therefore, this means that we're correlating a verse. The same verb to describe finding is used in Proverbs in the context of finding God and finding Torah. And that's what the verse is referring to when it says, "For this, let every devout man pray to you regarding a time of mitzvah," which means you should be praying to God to give you success in Torah study. I have to tell you, Torah study for me is the most meaningful, wholesome experience on earth. I know that might be a little profound of a statement, but I challenge you, what is the most meaningful experience that you are able to do in this life? I just want to challenge you to think about that for a moment, and I would love to hear your comments if you could post them here. Good morning, Ed, and good morning, Robert Saunders. Robert Saunders, have we met before? Are you from Hawaii? I'm trying to remember if we've met before. But I'd like to challenge you, if you could post in the comments here, what is your most meaningful experience? What is the deepest, most meaningful, most wholesome experience that you can do? For some people, it might be eating. Some people might be meditating. For me, it's Torah study. Because for me, Torah study, as interpreted in the teachings of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, we learned last week in Tanya, 2 weeks ago in Tanya, that Torah study is might, which protects us, which gives us a shield to withstand the revelation of infinity of God with the coming of Mashiach. Torah is what resurrected the Jews at Mount Sinai, and what will resurrect us in the future. Torah is our ability to bond with God. Torah and God are one, and therefore when I study Torah, I am making myself one with God. That is the most intimate form of connection with God. So I turn to God in prayer and I say, "God, please allow me to understand your Torah." And indeed, if you open up the prayer book, just before the Shema, take a look at what we pray for just before the Shema prayer. If you have the prayer book in front of you, you can turn to the prayer just before the Shema. It's on page 41. And we say, "Enlighten our eyes in your Torah. Cause our hearts to cleave to your commandments, and unite our hearts to love and fear your name." Which means, enlighten our eyes in your Torah. We're asking God to open my eyes. You can live your whole life without realizing that you have a treasure just buried under your nose. How many Jews do I know that have gone off to Israelis that have gone off to the Far East, to the ashrams of India, and to the meditative temples of Nepal and Thailand and who knows where else, in order to find spirituality, when in reality it was underneath their own noses. It was in Torah. And they just didn't realize it because they didn't have a good enough teacher to guide their ways. You can pray to God to find a teacher that will open your eyes, open your heart, and make sure that you yourself are receptive to learning Torah. Because once you get turned on to Torah, once you realize the extraordinary power that is Torah and the beauty and enlightenment that it is. Many of us in this forum have discovered the book of Tanya. Think about how Tanya was an unknown gem in your life. You never knew about it. It never existed. It was like whatever. It was just a book on the shelf. And you never really were able to make anything out of it. But then when you learn Tanya, or maybe when you learn to the great rabbi or a great teacher, you are suddenly able to discover the beauty and the depth and the majesty of Torah. That is what we're supposed to pray for, to be able to open our eyes to the profundity of Torah. I see Lauren posted here on YouTube that it's being with her children, which is the most wholesome experience. And that's a beautiful answer. Beautiful. I see Robert, you're from West Palm Beach. Nice. It's the most beautiful experience to be with your children. But I got to tell you that for me, I love being with my children too. But on a deep personal level, in my own personal growth, I am my Torah study. I am my connection with my God, which is independent of any other human being on earth. It's me and my God. And that is what the Talmud is telling us to pray for. Here in this chapter, wisdom, Torah, as it were, is speaking, calling out for all to hear. In this chapter in Proverbs, the chapter begins, surely wisdom will call out near the gateways of the city, she cries out. To succeed in Torah, a person needs great effort and diligence. Without effort, it is impossible to succeed. Nevertheless, efforts alone does not guarantee success. A person must also ask for God's help. There's a great story about the Tzemach Tzedek, and this story really inspired much of my spiritual journey. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, was raised by his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, because his mother passed away at a young age, in a beautiful story. His grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, wanted to bless him with success in Torah study. And the Tzemach Tzedek refused. He says, no, don't bless me with success in Torah study. I'd like to earn it on my own. But years later, the Tzemach Tzedek regretted that decision. He says, if only I would have received the blessing of my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, to study, to success in Torah study, that would not preclude me from succeeding. I would work hard on top of that. In other words, without the blessing, I worked hard and I achieved. But with the blessing, I would have worked hard. On top of the blessing, I would have achieved so very much more. And that's something which inspires me in my own spiritual journey. And that is, don't decline anything which you can get from someone else. Anything which divine providence sends your way, grab it. And don't be lazy, work hard on top of that. I see that Marty agrees with me that Tanya is amazing. It truly is incredible. It's the most dense, spiritual, deep and meaningful study that I've ever come across. There's nothing comparable to it in English literature or in any other language that I've ever studied. Talmud comes close. Maybe more dense than Tanya is the Zohar, which the Tanya is explaining. The Zohar is the book of Kabbalah. Tanya will literally spend 6 chapters explaining 3 words in the book of the Zohar. So definitely the Zohar, the book of Kabbalah, is more dense than Tanya, but the Tanya is the explanation of it. And when you're able to realize the beauty and the majesty and the profundity of Tanya, that's an extraordinary achievement to be able to reach. And that's the second of our 5 things that we're supposed to be praying for. And I challenge you to think, have you prayed for God to open your heart in the ways of Torah study? During this quarantine, think about it. Many people were literally going mad. Why? Because they couldn't go to their social events. They couldn't play cards. Good morning, Miriam and Mickey. Welcome to Facebook. Think about it. How many people were literally going mad that they couldn't do anything which was part of their real life. They couldn't play cards. They couldn't go shopping. They couldn't just go to parties. And they realized the quarantine forced us to realize who you really are. When things are taken away from you, you realize, who you truly are. And many people realize that I am my shopping experience, or I am my social experience, or I am my relationship with my friends. And if I don't have that, I'm going mad. For me, made no difference in that sense, because for me, Torah study is who I am. That's my family. Yes, it was difficult being separated from all the people, the beautiful people that we engage with, but that's not what defines me. For me, Torah study is who I am. I could live on a desert island, I think, with just my family and my books. I think I could survive, but and I'd probably thrive. But that's the question that I want to challenge you today. Do you pray to God to open your heart in the depths of Torah, in the labyrinths and the caves and the tunnels and the mountains of Torah, to be able to find profound spirituality, depth, meaning, and connection within your Torah study? Because for many Jews, Torah is like just, the Maccabees and the Greeks, and it's a Hebrew school children's play, and that's pretty much the extent of their Torah study. And what a shame that is. It's such a shame. It's like, imagine you inherited $10 million and you never cashed the check. Or you inherited $100 million and you just never cashed the check. You like to keep it on your mantelpiece. What a shame. Cash it in, enjoy it. Each and every one of us inherited the greatest gift that the world has ever known. It's God's gift to mankind. It's called the Torah. And if we don't access it, if we don't study it, we're missing out. And that's what the Talmud's telling us to pray for. The third opinion, let's move on. If you have any questions, please feel free to post. Questions, comments, critique. Oh, coming in from Rivka, from Massachusetts. What is the most meaningful for me, since I don't have any children, is to deepen my relationship with God and to study Torah. The Torah has helped me in my life since nothing could. First of all, Rivka, thank you for sharing your comment. I'm so sorry to hear that you didn't have children. But I am inspired to hear about your relationship with Torah. I don't think we've ever met, Rivka, but you're from Massachusetts. And it's beautiful to hear how you deepened your relationship with God through the study of Torah. And the Torah has helped you in life in a way that nothing could. So you can totally relate to what we're learning here today. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with me here. That's really, really beautiful. I want to say to Lauren, I want to say this point to you, Lauren, as you say that the most meaningful, deepest experience for you is being with your children. I want to just challenge you to think, what's going to happen when your children one day grow up and leave? Like my mom, she has 9 kids. She says, you have to give your kids wings and then let them fly. So what happens when they fly? When they fly out of the nest? Are you now no longer human? Are you no longer Lauren because your children have left the nest? Are you codependent on your children? That's not a healthy place to be. You've got to be able to develop your own 2 feet to stand on. And that's why I want to say to you, as beautiful and meaningful and touching it as it is to have that deep connection with your children, you can't really define yourself by your children or by your spouse, by any other human being upon the face of the earth, for that matter. Because if you do, you're codependent, and that's unhealthy. When you're healthy in your own skin, that's when you can have healthy and meaningful relationships with others. That's what we learned in Tanya chapter 32. Okay, let's go further. The third opinion of Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, regarding a time of mitzvah refers to death. The verse in King David, Psalms 32, says, "For this, let every devout man pray to you regarding a time of mitzvah." This refers to death. A man should pray that when the time comes for his soul to be removed, motzi, like we said by bread, motzi lechem min haaretz, he takes the bread out of the earth. When the time comes for your motzi, which is for your removal, for your extraction, that's what you should be praying for. It should be easy and painless. You should pray for an easy and painless death. As it says in Psalm 68, to Hashem the Lord belongs the totzaot, the various ways of removing the soul from the body for death. Okay, in order to stress the importance of praying for an easy death. Now, the Gemara cites a brisa, which is a tradition from Moses and Mount Sinai, that notes the wide variety of deaths, some of which are more painful than others. I'd like to ask you, just before we get into this, how many kinds of deaths do you think that there are in the world? Just think about this for a moment. How many ways of dying, of leaving this world, do you think that there are? Just think about that for a moment. Post it if you dare. If you want to think that you could guess what the Talmud's about to tell us about how many kinds of death there are in this world. Let's take a look. A brisa taught this: 903 forms of death were created in this world. As it says, to Hashem the Lord belong the totzaot for death. The totzaos for death. Corey says many. Safe answer, Corey. Good. It says, to Hashem the Lord belong the Totzaos for death, and the gematria, the numerical value of the word Totzaos, is 903. The word Totzaos has a numerical value of 903, and therefore when it says in the verse in Psalm 68, Lamaves Tetzais, for there are Totzaos of death, it means there are 903 forms of death. The harshest of them all, what is the most painful form of death? Anybody, can you guess? What is the most painful form of dying? The one that you should be praying to avoid at all costs. That, my friends, is Askara. Askara is the form of death that you want to be avoiding. What exactly is Askara? It's defined as diphtheria, a disease that primarily infects the throat. In the days of the Talmud, it was feared as one of the most horrible diseases, often leading to a ghastly death. The disease attacks the intestinal tract in its early stages. As it progresses, the throat becomes constricted, and the patient can slowly strangle to death. It's a very slow, drawn-out, and extremely painful and humiliating death. If I remember correctly, this 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died from Askara. They died from the plague of diphtheria. What is the best way to die? So if you had to pray for death, I mean, you can't pray not to die, because that's one of the things we all have to do. Like Jackie Mason says, that there's only two things you got to do, absolutely no questions asked, and they are death and taxes. Two things you got to do. But the question is, how am I going to die? By the way, there was a great story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi in the Talmud. I think I've said this to you, the story. But just a quick reminder, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was a very, very holy sage. And he knew that if you study Torah, the angel of death cannot claim you. While studying Torah, the angel of death cannot take your life. So what he did was, he made sure not to ever stop studying Torah. I don't know exactly how he pulled that off, while he was sleeping. I don't know how on earth he was able to arrange that, but he was privy to things that you and I are not. And he was able to study Torah to the point that the angel of death became so utterly frustrated. He said to him, no, stop being such a nudnik, right? And let me already take you. I've got other clients to take care of. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him, but how do I know where you're going to take me? I need to know if you're going to take me to Gan Eden, to paradise, or to Gehinnom, to purgatory. So he says, that's none of my business. My job is to bring you to heaven, and they deal with you from there. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, look, I'll make you a deal. I'll let you take my soul by stopping to study Torah, only if you let me look over the fence and see into the Garden of Eden. Even if I don't go there, at least let me see what it's like. And the angel of death said, fine, go take a look, and then I will take your soul. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, but how do I know that you won't take my soul while I'm climbing the ladder, while I'm distracted and looking at the Garden of Eden? Obviously, this whole thing is anthropomorphic, because there's no ladder and there's no wall around the Garden of Eden. So they made a deal that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would hold the soul of the angel of death in his hands, so to speak, to kind of use it as a collateral, that the angel of death would not be able to take his life while he was looking over the fence. Am I still there? I think my screen just froze. I hope that you can still see me. Friends on YouTube, am I still there? Shoot. I hope that you can see me, because my screen seems to have just frozen. I hope that you can see me, that you can hear me. No idea. Oh, there I am. I think I'm here. Thank you, Ashley. I see you can still see me. And back on Facebook, I've unfrozen. This is good. I guess that was a good show and tell for what happened to the angel of death when his soul was in the hands of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He was like frozen in motion. He couldn't move anymore. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi now jumps over he looks over the Garden of Eden, and he jumps in. He's drawn into the Garden of Eden, jumps in, and he's got the soul of the angel of death in his hands. And there was a whole ruckus, like somebody jumped into Garden of Eden uninvited, and he's got the soul of the angel of death. The angel of death has been hijacked, sabotaged, murdered. Nobody knows what's going on. They had to make a whole negotiation with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi to leave him in the Garden of Eden and still return the soul of the angel of death back to him. He was like the only guy that ever got into the Garden of Eden by breaking in. Anyways, back to our story. What is the best way of dying? Corey is correct by saying it is dying through a kiss. Well, Miriam says, I think Miriam said to be alone, old and alone. I think is that a good way to die, Miriam, or a bad way to die? I guess to be old is a good way to die. To be alone is probably a bad way to die, like coronavirus style is horrible to die like that, right? But Corey says to die in your sleep would be a really nice way to die, or to die through a kiss of God. What a nice way to die. What a nice way to die. Just to answer Marty's question, can the angel have a soul? Whatever he's got in there, whatever's mechanism is holding him together is, there is some sort of a soul in there, where it's not a human soul, a piece of God, it's some other kind of soul. Whatever's keeping him alive is what he took from him, maybe a battery or whatever you want to call it. In any event, the best form of dying, says the Talmud, like Corey says, is dying through a kiss. The harshest of them all is askara. The mildest of them all is neshika, which means a kiss. The Talmud states that the souls of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Aaron, Miriam, and Moshe were all taken through neshika, which is a kiss. Neshika is unique in that God himself, and not the angel of death, takes the soul of the departed. Basically it's when God reveals himself to the dying person, and the soul of the dying person jumps over into its mothership, into God. So that's the best way of dying. It's kind of like how the sons of Aaron probably died when they approached too close to the Holy of Holies, uninvited, and their souls departed through their nostrils, like in two flames of fire left their nostrils. That's probably how they died, also a death of a kiss. But it says about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Aaron, Miriam, and Moshe. By the way, the Torah hides the fact that Miriam died through a kiss, because it's not so modest for the Torah to say that God kissed Miriam. So it's kind of like hidden a little bit. Interesting, right? Anyways, the Talmud explains, askara, the theory is like thorns that are stuck in a ball of wool, where when the thorns are yanked back to remove them from the ball, some of the wool is removed with them. Very painful. So too, when a person dies through askara, his soul is removed from his body in a harsh and painful manner. And there are those who say that askara is like ropes that have been forced through tight holes and planks of wood, where removing the ropes is extremely difficult. There are places in the ocean where it is dangerous to travel in a ship that has iron, because there are magnetic stones on that part of the ocean floor that attract the iron and will pull the ship down. I think this is a Talmudic reference to the Bermuda Triangle or something. Magnetic stones pulling the iron in the ship. Therefore, the ships that had to travel, they were made without any metal. The wooden sections of the ship had holes drilled into their ends and were held together with ropes as thick as the holes to ensure strong watertight seals. These thick ropes had to be forced through the holes, and great force would be needed to remove them later. So basically, it's kind of very painful. I'm not sure about this ship engineering thing about ropes being pushed through very tight holes, or thorns stuck in a ball of wool. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it sounds pretty painful, right? Corey, when you say your father died, was that through a kiss, through Hashem's kiss? That's pretty beautiful. Or that he died in his sleep. So too, when a person dies by askara, his soul is pulled with force out of his body, which is very, very painful. Neshika, the kiss on the other hand, is like removing a hair from milk. When you take a hair from milk, it's easy peasy. It's just beautiful. You pluck out the hair from the milk, and it's all done. The hair can gently be lifted out. No resistance is encountered. So too, when a person dies through neshika, his soul slips out of his body in a painful manner. Rabbi Dessler explains the difficulty of a person's death depends on his righteousness. A truly spiritual person has little connection to this physical world. He happily accepts the decree to remove his soul from its bodily garment. He's lived his life more in the spirit in heaven than on earth, and therefore for his soul to leave the body is really not a big deal. It's like plucking a hair from milk. However, for a person who spent his life immersed in pursuit of physical experiences, the separation of body and soul is described as being difficult. Right? Actually, this is how I teach the idea. The name of a cemetery in Torah has got two different and opposing names. Sometimes a cemetery is called a place of death. Beis HaChaim, a place of life. And sometimes a cemetery is called Beit HaKvarot, which means a place of death, a place of graves. Why is there such a discrepancy between a place of life or a place of death? It depends on how you lived your life. If you lived your life where you were focused wholly on your body, on your restaurants and your food and your drink and your pleasurable experiences, then the cemetery is the end of the road. It's a place of death. But if you lived your life focused on a pursuit of the material of the pursuit of your soul, learning, wisdom, love, music, spirituality. If this is what your life was about, then the cemetery is not a place of death, it's a place of life. It's a place where your soul is released from the shackles of the body, and now the soul is truly able to soar ever higher to connect with God, with the mothership where it came from. Now I want to say that so that's very interesting in that sense, that you think about the way that you live your life is how you're going to die. Whether death is going to be a painful experience or a painless experience has a lot to do with what kind of immersion you had within your physical body or your soul. Now, Corey, I just want you to know, you say that Rabbi Dessler was from Cleveland. I don't think he was from Cleveland. He lived from 1891 to 1954, and I think he lived in Europe. Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, maybe thinking about another Dessler. In any event, let's take a look at some further depth, some further commentary on this idea of how you die. Okay, let's take a look. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky explains the similes offered by the Gemara in more detail. When a thick rope is pulled out of a tight hole, some of the rope's fibers will inevitably be stripped off and left behind as the rope is removed. A similar thing happens when a crude and earthly person dies. Such a person was so attached to the physical aspects of life that his soul becomes bound up with the body. As a result, when the time comes for his soul to depart, it is unable to make a clean break, and the traces of the soul are stripped off and left behind within the body. The soul that rises up to heaven is therefore an incomplete soul. It's a little broken. It's painful. The soul of a righteous person, on the other hand, remains aloof from the body even during the person's lifetime. It therefore encounters little or no resistance to the separation of death, just as a hair encounters no resistance to its removal from a glass of milk. In both cases, the removed object emerges intact, since no counterforce pulls on from the opposite direction. That is from Rabbi Yohanatan Eibeshitz, Ya'arot Vash, his book called The Forests of Honey. Rabbeinu Yonah, in the book Shari Tshuva, The Gates of Repentance, formulates a lesson to be taken from our Gemara. If you want to avoid death, die before you die. How interesting. Rabbeinu Yonah tells us, if you want to avoid death, then make sure to die before you die. What does that mean? Separate yourself voluntarily from physical pleasures before death separates them from you against your will. So make sure to live a little higher. Remember, we're made up of body and soul. Are you defined by your body, or are you defined by your soul? Just like we spoke about earlier, which is, what is your most deepest and wholesome experience? Is it eating and drinking, or is it learning Torah? Is it music? Is it wisdom? Or is it playing baseball? Right? That's what's going to define who you are, whether you're more corporal or more spiritual. From other comments in Rabbeinu Yonah's presentation there, Rabbi Goldberg infers that Rabbeinu Yonah has a different understanding of Gemara. Death is traumatic for pleasure seekers, not only at the time of death, but also during the soul's after-death existence in heaven. This is because one's soul continues to desire after death the same things it did during its earthly life. If a person's lifelong yearnings were for spiritual attainments, his soul will yearn for and enjoy the wonderful spiritual delights available to it in the world of souls. But if one's lifelong desires were for physical indulgences, his soul will desire the same pleasures in heaven. Since such pleasures cannot be had there, these desires will be a source of unending and unbearable frustration and anguish. As a result, this unenlightened person dies 1,000 deaths, for his insatiable desires cause him to experience over and over the pain of separation from the physical world, the very same pain that he experienced when his soul first departed from his body. So we learn a lot here about after death. You see, our soul is our character. That character continues to live on after we die. When you get up to heaven, do you fit right in, or do you stick out like a sore thumb? Think about it. What happens if you right now, the way you are dressed right now, think about it. Whatever you're wearing or not wearing right now, imagine you showed up at a wedding. Would you feel comfortable or not? right? So think about it. I mean, like look at me. I'm dressed this way, right? I'm dressed wearing a formal white shirt. This is how I dress, right? So for me, the way you dress, by the way, says a lot about you. About the way you dress on the outside says a lot about what's going on inside of you, right? So if you're walking around with flip-flops and a shorts, or if you're walking around in a bikini or something, it's very expressive on who you are on the inside, right? So in fact, it says, by the way, that we'll be resurrected in when Mashiach comes, wearing the same clothes you wore in Shabbos. Whatever clothes you wore in Shabbos, that's what you're going to be wearing when Mashiach comes. So if you wore in Shabbos clothes, you'll fit right into the wedding. But if you wore a bikini or a bathing suit on Shabbos, then you probably will stick out like a sore thumb. And that's what's happening when we reach the next world. Our character lives on. Our soul lives on. When you get to heaven, you feel, I'm perfectly at home. Or do you feel like you stick out like a sore thumb, where you miss your restaurants and your cruises and your swimming pool and your TV and your Mets and your Yankees and your Cubs and whatever else that you defined your life with? Or are you like, I'm about Torah, Rashi, Rambam, King David, King Solomon, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, Tanya, this is who I am, and up in heaven, you like cruise right in, you feel right at home, it's amazing, right? So whether you die after you die, or whether you live after you die, it depends on how you lived your life in this world. Let's just do two final opinions before we call it a day here. We've learned two opinions today. One of them was to pray for Torah study, success in Torah study. The second one we said today was to pray for how to die. Now we're going to do two more opinions. Rabbi Yochanan said, what does a time of mitzvah mean for which one should pray? It refers to burial. A person should pray that when he passes away, he should merit to be buried. Rabbi Hanina said, from which verse do we see the finding mitzvah is associated with burial? For it is written, those who rejoice at good fortune, who delight when they find the grave. This book in Job, this phrase in Job refers to finding the grave as yimtsu'u, the grave, which shows us that the verb of finding is related to burial. And it's not to be taken for granted that a person will be buried. Think about what happened in 9/11. Think about what happened to people in airplane crashes, or God knows what kind of horrible deaths people can have, that they never actually find a proper burial, right? God forbid, or a car accident even, right? Sometimes they can't be properly buried, right? To be able to be worthy of Kavuras Yisrael, of being buried as a Jew, is a major, major big deal. Another Amoret comments on this. Rabbi Bar Rav Shila said this interpretation is supported by what people say. A person should pray for mercy, that he should have peace even until the last shovelful of earth is thrown upon his grave. It's not to be taken for granted that you'll be buried as a Jew, and that's something we should be praying for. The fifth and final opinion, Mar Zutra said, this is interesting, regarding a time of mitzvah, refers to going out. Going out refers to relieving oneself in the outhouse. A person should pray that he should have an outhouse near his home so that he should not have to go far in order to relieve himself. Interesting. Now, obviously, the word going out is a reference to emptying your bowels. Right, like we learned in the Torah last week, it said, you shall have a place outside the camp, and to it you shall go out to relieve yourself. It's a mitzvah in the Torah that there should be no bathrooms inside of the Jewish camp. It should be outside of the Jewish camp. It's got to be holy. You can't just relieve yourself wherever you want. You got to go out of the camp in order to relieve yourself. Now, why is it so important? The Talmud concludes, in the West in Israel, they said that this explanation of the 5 explanations. Remember, we had 5 explanations for prayer. One was for a good marriage. One was for Torah study success. The third one was for an easy death. The fourth one was for a proper Jewish burial. And the fifth one was a prayer to have a proper bathroom close to you so you can go, so you'll always be able to go to relieve yourself properly. In Israel, and they said in the West, that this explanation offered by Mar Zutra is better than all of the other preceding explanations. Interesting. Why is it? For several reasons. Many diseases can afflict a person who doesn't have a restroom nearby and is forced to restrain his bodily functions. Maimonides says that people that don't go to the bathroom is the cause for all illness. Additionally, one may not pray for study or study Torah at that time. Furthermore, if a person disregards the urge to relieve himself, he transgresses the commandment, you shall not render yourselves abominable, which is called bal tashaktu. You're not allowed to make yourself abominable by withholding yourself from going to the bathroom. You're standing before God when you need to. When you need to go, it's bal tashaktu. Don't make yourself disgusting before God. Maharsha suggests a different reason for why this interpretation was praised over the others, namely because it is the only one that fits in with the end of the verse. You see, the full verse in King David's Psalms reads, for this, let every devout man pray to you regarding a time of mitzvah, only that a torrent of mighty waters not overtake him. According to the last interpretation, the verse means that a person should pray that he have an outhouse close to his home, lest he have to walk far out into the field to go to the bathroom, and he will not be able to contain his urge to urinate for that long, and then a torrent of mighty waters will overtake him. So the verse in King David's Psalm seems to corroborate this interpretation that you might have you might have an accident relating to flow, which is why you should be praying to have a proper bathroom. Plumbing is very important. The plumbing is everything. Just one thing I want to say about the fourth interpretation, which is a proper burial. A person's relatives have an obligation to bury him when he dies. Nevertheless, there are some people who, for one reason or another, do not merit to be buried, and it is therefore something that a person must pray for while alive. Others explain that one should pray that he be buried close to the time of his death and not have to wait to be disgraced after his death, being left outside of the ground. You know, there was a person in my father's community who always was worried that he would die. So that when he died, people would think he was dead. And he wasn't really dead. He heard these horrible stories of people trying to claw their way out of coffins. You know, I don't know how, but they found in coffins, some coffins, they found that there were like claw marks inside the coffins, because I guess the person was just fainted. And when he discovered that he was alive, when he woke up, he was probably already 6 foot under. I mean, I don't think in modern they have these problems, but that's what this guy was afraid of. He begged my father to wait 3 days, 72 hours before he buried him. And my father was like, listen, you know, he's his rabbi, but he said, you know, you're not really supposed to do that. You're supposed to bury a person right away. It's considered disrespectful. Please, Rabbi, I'm begging you, wait 3 days if you bury me. That was his wish. This guy passed away Erev Shabbos, which was Erev Yantiv. Which means my father, he died, let's say, on a Friday afternoon, right? So my father couldn't bury him the whole Shabbos. Then he couldn't bury him the first day of Yom Tov. My father had no choice but to wait till the second day of Yom Tov, which was 3 days after the guy died, because just the way it worked out unusually in the Jewish calendar. And indeed, that's what happened. So a person should pray to be able to merit to be buried properly, and to be merited to be buried very close to the time of death. And the way to do that, by the way, is making sure that you already have a grave. And you can call us here at the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens to arrange a burial place for yourself. We still have some plots left in the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens Cemetery, which is kosher and halachically highest standard as a kosher cemetery. Please call the office if you'd like to learn more about that. It's 561-624-2223 to learn about how you can purchase a grave from the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens Cemetery. 561-624-2223. Friends, today is Wednesday. I believe that there is no ladies class tonight because my wife is preparing the kids for the first day of school tomorrow. But tomorrow night, there'll be a Mashiach class at 8 o'clock. I'll be teaching a class on Mashiach. It will be about Elijah the prophet, the harbinger of the redemption. So join me tomorrow night at 8 o'clock on Zoom only tomorrow night. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining me this morning for Talmud study. I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Be safe. And don't forget, the shul is open for services every morning here at 7:30. We're really trying to rebuild our minyan back again. We really could use your help. We have masks and social distancing. Please join us here in the mornings at 7:30 to help us daven, to make a minyan, even though we are davening on Zoom as well. And on Shabbat, of course, our services are fully functional and open. If anybody would like to sponsor the Kiddush this Shabbos, we'd like to get the Kiddush back on track. Please call us, 561-624-2223. And with that, everybody, I'd like to wish everyone a good day. And thank you for joining me this morning. Shalom.